Perfect. Before we deal with persisting our data across the pages, now let me quickly cover what is happening here as far as the imports and exports. So notice over here, I have export, and then I'm exporting object all the way in the bottom. And essentially, this is exactly the same if I would have written this like so, where I would go with export. You know what? Let me just quickly comment this out. Now, of course, you don't have to do that, but I'm just going to showcase that it is exactly the same if I would export this as, for example, let store, then I would want to export the setup store. So const setup store. And then, of course, I would have my function. These are equal. Now, why would you prefer one over the other? Well, what I like about this syntax that essentially if you have bunch of export statements going from the file, then I just like to group them. That's it. That's the reason why I like this. Please understand that both of them do exactly the same thing. I could have written this as export, let store, export, and then setup store. So all these three pieces of data that I have, I could have exported just by having this export statement. Now, what I don't like is the fact when you use that kind of setting, if you have a bunch of code in between, it's just a little bit of confusing to find, well, what are you actually exporting? So for example, imagine the scenario where you're not exporting the store, you're not exporting the find product, however, you are exporting the setup store. And then you have to go through the whole file and be like, okay, where's that little export keyword in front of my variable, my function, or whatever. So this just gives me, okay, I have all my file, and then all the way in the bottom, I just have my exports. I'm saying I'm exporting a store, I'm exporting setup store, and find product. But just keep in mind that it is exactly the same if I would written this like so. So if I would have export and then store. It's just my preference to use this type of syntax, which you'll probably see from time to time. And as a side note, we're not using this in this project, but if you would want to give it an alias, in this case, you would go with store and then as, and then come up with a name. Again, we're not doing that in this project, but just be aware that you might see this type of syntax. Awesome. So now we understand what is happening here with an export statement. And now we can finally deal with get storage item as well as set storage item.